KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
Hey, I'm Josh Barrow, your new host of Left, Right, and Center. Every week, join Rich Lowry, Bob Scheer, and me for a contentious yet civilized debate of the week's big political stories, from ISIS to the U.S. economy to this 47-candidate presidential election we're having. You can find Left, Right, and Center on KCRW's iTunes page.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. My guest sitting across from me, how long have I known you now, Cameron?
A couple decades,
a
long
decades,
time.
Yeah, it goes back to the 20th century.
Yes, it does.
Back when he was a mere journalist.
That's right. The earth was still cooling then, I think.
You've been to California? It's not cool
Not
in
today.
here, buddy.
Yeah.
But my guest, Cameron Bailey, who is now the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival, I knew him when he was a film critic and journalist and programmed what I thought was one of the more interesting sidebars of any film festival, which was Planet Africa. And that taste for international film and film, how best to put this, in the developing world is still a key part to the way that festival is programmed. Cameron, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I think that's one of the things when I think about festivals, because for me, they all have a personality, and that sort of sense of not looking down its nose at regions that are outside of the Western world is one of the things I always think about as being key to the way Toronto's programmed.
It is, and I guess it's in our DNA. We started as an international film festival. We always wanted to have a programming team that was looking outward into the world, and that actually often lived outside of Toronto and traveled widely outside of Toronto as well. So, we've got 22 programmers now. Some of them live overseas. We've got a programmer for Africa and the Middle East who lives in Beirut, a programmer for East Asia who lives, oddly enough, in Rome, but is fluent in Mandarin and has spent a lot of time in China and East Asia. And that's really a part of what we do. And even the people who live in Toronto, it's important that we spend a lot of time just getting to know film cultures and film industries all over the world.
And that way, it feels like it really is an outgrowth of the city because Toronto is an international city.
Yeah, we like to crow about that a lot, but it is
really?
kind of true.
Every time you introduce a film, it's an international city.
We love Toronto. We love our city. One of the things that makes it really distinct is it's not the biggest city in the world or the most beautiful city in the world, that's for sure. But the people is really the thing in Toronto. And the people are from all over the world, from over 100 different countries and dozens and dozens and dozens of languages spoken on the street every day. And although Canada is officially a bilingual country, French and English, you can easily hear Mandarin and Portuguese and Italian and Farsi and all kinds of languages regularly on the bus and the streetcar. And in fact, half of the people, just a little bit over half of the people in Toronto were not born in Canada. So that is really what that city is. Toronto is a little bit more mixed, I would say, than a lot of other places. It's not perfect. There are issues there as well. But this is the city that's produced people like The Weeknd recently, who, obviously is coming from an East African background and has become a major star. That just happens now in our city, which is great.
I guess who's dropping both The Weeknd and probably Drake at some point.
I didn't say Drake. I didn't want to be the first.
It's only a matter of time before that name falls from somebody's lips over here, some Canadian. It's the treatment, I guess, is Cameron Bailey, who's the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival. Let me ask you, because somebody always want to know, first film that really had an impact on you?
Oh, that's a great question. 2 things I would say. I was not a big cinephile growing up. It really wasn't until I went to university and discovered international cinema that did it for me. So when I was at university, it was probably Breathless that did it for me. I took a contemporary cinema course, and it was international cinema. It started with Breathless and then went into Italian neorealism, French New Wave, Cinema Nova from Brazil, etc. But before that, when I was a kid growing up, the first time I remember really paying attention to a movie as opposed to just entertainment was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was Spielberg. And I remember that because it came out in the theaters, and I was pretty young, like a teen or tween or something like that. And I went to see that movie 3 times when it was in the theater. And then when it came out again as some kind of special edition, I went to see it like another 3 or 4 times. And I became obsessed with that film. I don't even know exactly why, but there was some kind of mystery in it. The sense of people getting obsessed and they don't even know why they're obsessed, which is very much through and through that movie. That kind of did it for me.
It's funny you say that because the films you're describing, especially when you're talking about South America, a lot of the films I think of from Planet Africa And when I think about films and you, they tend to be films about villages.
That's interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole tradition. I'm sure there are books written about village cinema, and there are pros and cons with that because, on the one hand, those films often try to get at the heart of the sort of cultural texture of a place, which is, traditional living, how life has been led for thousands of years in some cases. But on the other hand, village cinema can be a kind of a trope in the festival circuit, for instance. So there are some very sophisticated filmmakers who are from Africa or Asia or Central Asia or Latin America, and they live in Paris, they live in Berlin, they live in very sophisticated contemporary lives, but they make their films about villages because they think that's what's going to work internationally. That's what's going to win them prizes. So there's a little bit of a thing about that.
I was thinking about that as you paint yourself further into a corner, because Close Encounters is a film that's kind of that too. This group of people who get together who become this village, between Truffaut and Richard Dreyfuss and Melinda Dillon, and they all become they become a kind of a de facto village trying to build this community for themselves.
They do. I guess, one of the things I'm most interested in cinema, although I love visuals, I love the technique and the craft of cinema, but I'm interested in social dynamics. And it's why I like Ang Lee's movies a lot. And it's why I like Michael Haneke, because those films are, in a way, about villages or villagers as well, like small groups, small communities that have enormous tension, sometimes that are unspoken, and they come to the surface. And I just find that fascinating.
I bring this up, too, just because I feel like that becomes a way to get to know a filmmaker. You sort of get to know some of those things are kind of about fears. Fears of like these villages being sort of torn apart or eliminated one way or another. In some ways, these films, a lot of them tend to be about the passage of time, but also the end of an era in one way or another.
That's true. I'm thinking this is a weird leap from Close Encounters of the Third Kind to White Ribbon, but suddenly I'm reminded of that film, which is very much about a village, the end of an era and the beginning of a new, very frightening era, of course, and I think Haneke did it brilliantly. That may be the first time I've thought of those two movies together, but there is a connection, so thank you.
Well, nobody's ever used the term first on this show before, but I think I just bring this up because I feel like there's been, especially under your aegis at the festival, there's been the kind of a shift to films that don't feel so much about trying to take on a lot, but they become these stories that are maybe small but have kind of an epic emotional scope to them.
I think for me, those are often the most interesting stories. I think ultimately the reason we watch movies is to see something of ourselves reflected back at us. And I think what we're most concerned with as human beings is just how we relate to other human beings. That's the essential nature of being a human being. You actually care what other people think of you, how you connect to other people, how you don't connect. Some of the best Canadian filmmakers are famous for making films about how we don't connect with each other. Adam McGowan does that all the time, and maybe that's because we have so much landscape in Canada. It should actually be easy to just have your own space and not have to deal with other people at all, but we still do, and in a way we want to, even though it drives us crazy. And so those kinds of narratives I find fascinating.
But as you're calling films from around the world at various festivals, when the film, let's just walk through this a little bit, is submitted to the festival as a debut film, let's say from a first-time filmmaker who's wondering what his or her chances are of getting to the festival, what's that process like? How many people does it go through?
Well, it depends. There's different ways to submit. The simplest way is probably just to go online to our website, tiff.net, use an application process, and you send in a screener, and these days it's most often a link, and then that goes to the programming team. And there may be, I'd say, 2 or 3 stages, and we've got kind of checks and balances to make sure that each film is seen by at least 2 people before a decision is made. So that's one way. But the other way that we get a lot of the films sent to us is through companies, through the sales agents and the distributors that own the rights to these films. And these are often companies that we deal with pretty regularly. A lot of them are based in LA. The major talent agencies also package and sell films. So CAA, UTA, ICM, WME, Paradigm, they're all sending us lots and lots of films. And then there are many similar companies in Paris and Berlin and London and other places who are doing the same. So we get thousands of films in total from those companies, and then many more thousands come in cold. So either way can work. We do get films that just come in completely cold that none of us knew anything about, we weren't tracking, and they end up in the festival. But by and large, most of them do come from companies that are representing them.
I just wonder that too, because it's one of these things that I've heard from filmmakers, many of whom come here, who say Toronto is a place that is both kind of enticing to them because so many people come out for it. there's such a big presence. And people who've had films shown in the festival say one of the great things about Toronto is compared to going to Cannes or going to Sundance is that you get the population of the city there, which is a real film-loving city.
That is true. I think there is a difference. I mean, I think, look, each one of these festivals has their own character, their own nature, and I think there are positive things with each one of them. And I love going to Cannes, and I love going to Sundance and festivals like that. It's not quite the same, though, as going to a festival where you walk into the theater to launch your film, and you know that most of the people in there, not everybody, but most of them are regular moviegoers. And that is the case in a big city like Toronto. And I think Berlin has that as well. And there are many other festivals. I was on the jury at the Seattle Festival several years ago, and that really had that feeling as well, that these are people who love movies. They look forward to this particular time of year. And certainly people in Toronto do that. They take their vacations during our festival. Can you imagine that? Instead of leaving town and going out to someplace beautiful, they want to be in a dark space and watch these movies. So we love that. But yeah, those are people who, they watch commercial movies like everybody else, but they're really film lovers. They're seeking out something different. They know that in a lot of cases, this is their only chance to see these movies, which sounds strange because there are movies everywhere now. You can pick up your phone and have tens of thousands of movies at your fingertips, but not all of them, right? And not even sometimes the best ones, right? The marketplace that gets movies to you is not the same as curation. Do you know what I mean? Those are two very different things. And sometimes great movies, if there's no sort of commercial potential to them as deemed by distributors and others, they just don't get a release otherwise. So festivals sometimes are the one place to see them.
I think that, too, is part of the thing that seems to appeal to audiences about Toronto, the idea of, and I've often said this, the thing I love most about film festivals is walking into a movie I know nothing about, and that idea of being surprised by something with a group of people.
That's right. Yeah, that is an amazing thing. It's a great experience, and it happens too rarely, I think. I mean, especially if you're a movie fan and you can't help yourself. You just, you read Twitter, you're following blogs, you're following critics and stuff. It can feel like movies have been around for months or sometimes years before you even get to see them. That's certainly the case with big commercial movies like Star Wars, coming up at the end of this year. But even with independent films, if it's a named filmmaker, how often have we heard about the new Tarantino film already? It'll be months before most of us see it. So to be surprised, to walk in knowing nothing, it's an amazing experience. And I like that people at our festival still give themselves that. They will sometimes just, flip through a program book and just put their finger down and choose something. Oh, we have a movie from Bangladesh this year. It's a new filmmaker that most people wouldn't have heard of. They might choose to see that one.
Do you miss that possibility of being really surprised by movies to the extent that you used to?
It still happens a little bit now. We expanded our range of what we were screening this year in terms of, myself, Piers Handling, the CEO of the organization, because we started a new program called Platform.
Which is a competition.
That's right. It's a jury program and 12 films only, so very small numbers. We had to be very selective, and we wanted it to be very international. So we were looking much further afield and really relying on the international programmers to help us see things that they would have selected on their own in the past. So a lot of these filmmakers I didn't know, a lot of the films I didn't know much about. There was a film from Brazil that made it into the Platform selections called Neon Bull, also in Venice this year. It is unbelievable, and I was jaw-droppingly surprised, watching that movie. I'd seen things that I'd never seen in a movie before, and I watch a lot of movies, so that doesn't happen that often, and that was great.
Well, that's really that augurs really well for this competition, I guess.
I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for people to just get beyond some of the more known films and some of the bigger red carpet cast movies as well. We have a lot of those at the festival. We've got The Martian and Our Brand is Crisis and many others. But Platform is going to give that same kind of treatment. They'll play in a big 1,400-seat house, right at a very prominent place in the festival, to films that are just there on artistic merit purely. You might not ever have heard of the filmmaker, you might not recognize any of the actors in it, but we want to make that kind of commitment to this sort of cinema. And I think we've been very fortunate in the 12 that we've chosen.
We'll take a break. My guest, who seems to think Toronto is not one of the most beautiful cities in the world, is Cameron Bailey. He's the artistic director of the Toronto International Film
Beautiful
Festival.
People, though.
When we come back, we'll see if he still has a job. It's the treatment. There's more to go. Stay with us.
Take KCRW with you on one of our smartphone apps. Available for the iPhone, Android, and BlackBerry. You can stream KCRW live, listen to podcasts, and all our news and music streams. Learn more and download at kcrw.com/apps.
Welcome back. It's The Treatment. My guest who thinks Toronto's a weird place to spend your vacation seeing movies is the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival, Cameron Bailey. Now, let's be serious for a second here, because it's a festival that people talk about primarily because of the big commercial films, the big studio films you're mentioning. Again, it goes back for many people for the debut of American Beauty.
That's right, 1999.
Which became the way that studios began their Oscar campaigns. And that's got to be a kind of a tough line to be on, isn't it? To make sure you're not just part of that machinery, but also making sure that it becomes a delivery system for an audience.
You do get a lot of people asking you, hey, Cameron, what's going to win Best Picture this year? Hey, Cameron, what's going to be nominated? Who's going to be the Best Picture, Best Actor nominees, all that kind of thing. I have no idea. I don't know any more than anybody else does, especially now because there have been so many surprises lately, and films have kind of come out of nowhere and not necessarily been a part of those big campaigns and have suddenly caught momentum. And I like that. So, yes, it's great that films like American Beauty and Slumdog Millionaire and The King's Speech and Argo and others have come out of our festival in terms of a big launch. And last year we had Still Alice and Theory of Everything and the acting performance prizes that came out of that. But we don't go in planning for that because that would be idiotic. We have no idea what's actually going to catch that momentum. The one thing we do have is our audience, and they help us a lot because by the time they see films, and you begin to feel this, 2 or 3 or 4 days into the festival, they're the ones that actually begin generating that momentum. That's definitely what happened with American Beauty. That's definitely what happened with Slumdog, both of which were real outliers. Those were surprises. And I think that's when it's kind of most fun, when you feel like, oh, there's almost literally a dark horse coming up the backstretch, and that's the one that begins to take off. And that's exciting for us, but it's hard to plan for.
It's interesting, too, because until this year, and you just sort of pulled my chain to something, that the Canadian competition has every Canadian film that plays a festival is eligible for an award, so there's a competition there. But the idea of platform and using that kind of concentrated competition, why did you feel the need, or why did that happen at the festival this year?
We want people to pay attention to these films. That
is what we actually talked about before. That
yeah, everybody loves a horse race, right? And the idea of having a jury that would watch a small number of films and essentially encourage our audience to watch along with them, encourage the media to watch along and the industry to watch along and say, okay, which one do you think is going to win? Which one do you think is going to win? That generates attention. And then, of course, we wanted to have a kick-ass jury. So we got Claire Denis and Agnieszka Holland and Jia Zhangke, 3 of, I think, the finest filmmakers working right now, who are working at a very high artistic level. And I think we wanted to send that signal as well, that it's not just that they're competing for a juried prize, it's that we have filmmakers, people who I think the filmmakers in Platform can aspire to in terms of their own careers. We wanted those people to be judging.
Was that the primary criterion for the creation of Platform, was to say these would be films seen by filmmakers who have made an imprint in the world of cinema?
I think what we wanted to do was to build connections, So we have a section in our festival called Masters, which is where people like Jia Zhangke and Claire Denis would play ordinarily. And what we wanted to do with Platform was to essentially just take a risk and say this group of 12 films, this group of 12 filmmakers might be that next generation of masters. So we want them to get to the position where Claire and Agnieszka and Jia Zhangke are now. And maybe they're only 3 or 4 films into their own careers, but we think they have the kind of talent and the kind of vision to be able to get there.
Are these filmmakers who generally have only a handful of films to their credits so far?
It's a mix. So probably the best-known filmmakers in Platform this year are Ben Wheatley, who has his new film High Rise, Pablo Trapero, who's been at many other international festivals, who's got a film called The Clan, which is unbelievable. And then we've got one first-timer in terms of feature filmmaker, Eva Husson from France, who's made a terrific film called Bang Gang, which might just be the sexiest movie in the whole festival. It's called Bang Gang.
The title doesn't give anything away.
Not to be too subtle about it.
Well, the French, they have a way of just underplaying these things.
Yeah. And then, there's some filmmakers who are on their second or third feature, but we wanted mostly mid-career, but occasionally there's, a filmmaker who is brand new, who's got something really, significant to say.
Because I feel like this was necessary, and I think we talked about this a little bit when I saw you in Alacma about a month ago, is there are so many films at Toronto that it can be kind of an overwhelming prospect, the idea of trying to decide what to see, can't it?
It's like when you go to a restaurant, do you ever want to order everything on the menu? Well, if you do, then you're going to have a problem with our festival. But what I always encourage people to think about is that don't order everything on the menu. You can't. You're not going to be able to eat everything. So just choose. Everybody's going to have to choose. What we found is that for our audience, the regular moviegoers, what we call civilians, they have no problem with the size of our festival at all. They love it. They love the choice. They see it as a menu, and they choose, right? I'm going to have one of these and one of these and one of those. Journalists who are coming to our festival and sometimes buyers who are coming to our festival, it can drive them a little bit crazy, the size, because they feel like they do have to eat everything. I keep telling them, you don't.
But the other thing, too, the other fear for a lot of those people in those disciplines that you're talking about is they do want to be there when the next big thing happens, and they want to be there first when the next big thing happens.
That is hard because, we're not so unusual. The size of our festival is about the same as the size of the Berlin Film Festival. But that's
another continent, right? I just want to make sure I got this
yes,
right.
I know,
okay.
I know, but they're our colleagues. We see them as the same. We've got typically we've got a lot of new films that are making their world premiere. This year it's about 130, I think. So that's a lot. Even if you saw a quarter of the world premieres at our festival, you'd be doing well. So there is that. But I think, that chase to be there first, particularly for journalists, I kind of think it's a bit of a fruitless endeavor,
As somebody who once upon a time did it yourself.
used to do that. Yes, I know. But, so you catch up with, I know many very good, very experienced journalists who catch up with some of the hottest films of the year, 2 or 3 festivals down the line. You can't see everything all the time, right? So I think that's okay. I think if you go into our festival feeling like you have to be wherever, the hottest thing is happening every day, every moment of every day, it will drive you crazy. And I just don't encourage that at all. I want people to stay sane.
My guest, who is encouraging judgment, is Cameron Bailey. He's the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival, which starts on September 10th. What are you launching with?
We're launching with the new film from Jean-Marc Vallée. It's called Demolition. It's terrific. I think he's one of the best actors-directors right now, and he's got Jake Gyllenhaal, who is on a tear after Nightcrawler and Southpaw
and Everest, which you got playing.
Exactly. This is another terrific performance. So great combination, and a Canadian for our 40th anniversary. So that's great.
You got a few other Canadians. You got the new Denis Villeneuve film.
We have the Denis Villeneuve film Sicario, which was at Cannes. We've got a new Patricia Rozema film, Adam Agoyan, Deepa Mehta, 2 terrific first-timers, Canadians. I think it's important to point out. One is Andrew Civadino, who made Sleeping Giant, which was at Cannes, and then a new one called Closet Monster by Stephen Dunn. Both terrific debut features, and I think 2 of the best debuts we've got in the festival.
What are those about?
Closet Monster is a kind of a coming of age and coming out story. What I love, one of the things I love about it, it's got its own distinct style, but it's actually influenced by Xavier Dolan, who is 26 years old, and he's already exerting an influence on other filmmakers, which I love. and then Sleeping Giant is a kind of a teen boy story, kind of teen boys challenging each other in a way, and is beautifully made. So both of them well worth seeing.
But you mentioned Dolan, and he's another, I think, I hate to keep going back to this, one of these village filmmakers. These people make these groups that kind of seem that they're surrounded by these kind of impermeable membranes, and again, I just sort of feel like that's something that I don't know how conscious it is for you, but it's kind of a sweet spot for the way the festival's gone in the last
I guess
few years.
it has been, and Dolan is, we've shown all of his films, and he's somebody who I think is very comfortable at our festival, and one of the things I find interesting in terms of how international his reputation has grown is that, his films are very local. They are village films in a way. Even the language, it's not just Quebecois French, it's a particular kind of Quebecois French that his characters are often speaking.
And a specific rhythm, in fact, too.
That's right, yeah. And I think the more local he goes, this is what, anybody who creates fiction will know, the more local he goes, the more universal he becomes. And I think that's partly why his films are so appealing all over the world.
When you are not seeing films when you're reading, what are you reading?
Right now, I'm reading Emma Donohue's Room, which of course has been turned into a book by I turned to a film. Pardon me.
We made the leap for you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm interested in it for two reasons. One is I think the film is terrific. That really was one of those movies that surprised me this year. And then the other reason is I happened to meet Emma Donohue. She teaches at Western University in Canada, which is my alma mater.
That's right.
That's right. And we were on a panel together several months ago, and she was hilarious. And I thought I have to read the book. Her book is not so hilarious because the subject matter is quite dark, but it's beautifully written, and it gets the voice of a child better than anything I've seen in a long, long time. I have a 6-year-old myself, and I felt like, I get this kid in this movie.
Because that's something that tends to happen. A lot of the films, again, going back to Planet Africa, but even a lot of the films that play in the other sort of sidebars of the festival are about kind of coming-of-age stories. I mean, that's one of the things, you could say it's a festival trope. I feel like it feels like it's something that happens as often as not in Toronto, more so than maybe other international festivals I've been to. Yeah,
I wonder. I don't know. I mean, every festival develops a kind of a character or a reputation. I would maybe say coming-of-age stories are often something that people associate Sundance with as well. But at our festival, yeah, there is a range of them. I probably don't have enough perspective to really see how that's been mapped out over the years, but I think that probably is a part of what we do as well. And I think, like Sundance, like Rotterdam, we're interested in filmmakers who are beginning, and that's often what filmmakers gravitate to in their first and second features is the story of their own formation in a way.
How much time do you get to spend with the filmmakers during the festival? That's
not nearly enough, I will say. When I was a programmer and before I was in this job, I would get to stay out late and get drunk with filmmakers and hang out and party, and that stuff was great. There's a little less of that now, but we've preserved one thing. We still do karaoke, and that will attract the filmmakers, and we do it sort of deep into the festival in the second half when people have a little bit more time. And there is nothing like a dark room full of filmmakers from Azerbaijan and Brooklyn and London and everywhere, and Seoul especially, because the Koreans are famous singing Taylor Swift or something or Queen. It's unbelievable.
Do you have a karaoke special? What's yours? What do you do?
It used to be Me and Mrs. Jones, which I will still break out every now and then.
Because as you were talking about that too, I guess one of the things I find myself thinking about, in addition to those other things, is there tends to be a lot of sort of like formal or breaking of formal rules in the films that play Toronto. And that's, again, coming from a culling of festivals from around the world, isn't it? And that idea of setting out new rules or building rules that are specific to you. And it's done sometimes in big ways, as in with Denis, or small ways like Xavier. But that idea of sort of expanding what movies are supposed to be is something that I feel is kind of close to your heart, and we see that reflected in the festival a bit.
I love that experience when you're watching not just a story that you find really engaging or characters you find great, but you feel like you are actually rediscovering cinema. I remember watching Xavier Dolan's Mommy at Cannes last year, and there's a moment, if you've seen the film, everybody will know what that moment is, when he just sort of breaks the form and suddenly you're watching...
He starts playing with the frame.
Exactly. He's playing with the frame. I don't want to, if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to kind of spoil it, but there's a kind of moment of just an intervention in cinematic convention that I just loved. People applauded that moment. It's just a shot, really. It's like a trick, and people applauded that, and I think that's what you go to the movies for, and I get to do that every now and then at our festival as well.
So let the audience know what the dates of the festival are going to be.
September 10th to the 20th in Toronto, and everything is at TIFF.net.
Thanks for doing this. You got to come back next year.
I absolutely will. Thank you.
Well, my guest, we hope he can still go home to Toronto after running it down, is Cameron Bailey. He's the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival. Again, I can't thank you enough for doing this, Cameron.
My pleasure, Elvis.
Our recording engineer who also mixes the show is Cat 4. The show is edited by my associate producer, Blake Veit. I'm not from Toronto. It's The Treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.